In this video, we're going to take a look at how to use the graphing calculator, a TI-83 or 84 plus graphing calculator to do quadratic regression. We'll do it using this example here. While on vacation, Steve filmed a cliff diver. He analyzed the video and recorded the time and height of the diver in the table below. Determine an algebraic model to fit the data. Then use the model to predict when the diver will be 5 meters above the water. Okay, so this data has to be typed into our graphing calculator. So using our graphing calculator, we're going to go to our lists, which is under Stat and Edit. And we get to these lists, L1 to L2, L3. If you don't have an L1 or an L2, I'll show you in a minute how you're going to get those back. So right now I have data in my L1, so I want to clear the data out of this list. So what people often do as a mistake here, they will put their cursor on L1, it's a good step, and then hit delete, that's a bad step. But let's try it. If I hit delete, what ends up happening is I actually just deleted the entire list. You can see I no longer going to have an L1 anymore. So let's get this list back now. So if you were missing lists already, so you're going to do these steps to get the list back. Let's get out of this menu. I'm going to go second and quit. And then from here, I need to run something called Setup Editor. I'm going to go to Stat, and then there it is, that fifth option. Hit Enter. And we've run Setup Editor. It's not clear what's happened yet, but if I go back to Stat and Edit, I can see, okay, now my list one is back. It still has the data in it, but it's back now at least. So to clear it out, the way you do it properly is you go to your list one, and then press Clear and Enter. There we go. Now the data has actually been cleared out. If you had data in your list two, clear it now as well. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to type this data into the calculator. So in list one, I'm going to put the time values. So I would just type in 0, and then I can hit Enter, and that will get the 0 into list one for me. And then go ahead and type in the other, that's 0.5, and so on. I'm going to pause the video now. You can do the same, and we can type in this data now. Okay, so now that we've typed in the data, and you can make sure that your calculator does look the same as this one, now what we need to do is get the calculator to graph this data. So first thing we need to do is tell the calculator what the window should be. So I'm going to go to Window, and here we're being asked what are the minimum and maximum x values that should be graphed and the minimum and maximum y values. So let me just go here for a minute, and then we'll look back at the window screen again. So the x values are the time values. So I can see the time goes from 0 to 2 seconds. So I'm going to go on my calculator from 0 to 3 seconds, just so I'm not cutting off the graph right at the very end of it. So I do that by saying x min is going to be 0, x max is going to be 3. I'm going to choose a scale of 1, and the calculator will make little ticky marks every 1 unit along the x-axis. So at 0, 1, 2, and 3. For the y's, I can see the largest one is 35 and the smallest is 15. Y equals 0 is certainly an important point on this graph because that's when the diver would land in the water. So I want to get all the way down to 0 for sure. And once again, I go a little bit above 35, so I'm not cutting off the graph right at the last point. So I decided to go from 0 to 40 on the y-axis, and then I'm going by tens, so there'll be little ticky marks at 0, 10, 20, 30, and 40. We'll leave that x-res as 1. It's a measure of the resolution that the calculator is going to use. Okay, so now that I've typed in my data, using the list, and I've set up the window, I need to now tell the calculator to actually plot this data. So I'm going to have to go to Stat Plot here, second and y equals. This is where you have the settings for how to graph a table of values. You can graph 3 different tables at once under plots 1, 2, and 3. So let's go to plot 1. First option that I have to choose is whether I want this plot turned on or off. I want it on so that it'll actually show me this graph. Second option is what type of graph I'm going to draw, like a scatter plot maybe, or a bar plot, or maybe a box and whiskers plot. So I want to go with a scatter plot. So if it's not currently highlighted, I would just use the left and right arrows to move over to it and press enter, and I would highlight it. The next option is saying where are your x values. We put our x values in list 1. So this is good that I have a list 1 here. If you don't have that there, or if your x values are in, let's say, list 3, the list variables are written right along here using the second button. So for instance, if my x values were actually in list 3, I would go second L3, and now the calculator would know to grab the x values from L3. Okay, but that's not where they're at, so I'm going to go back here and I'm going to say, all right, put it back as L1. So yeah, my x values are in my L1, my y values are in L2, so that's good. And then the symbol that I'm going to use, I can either use this very small dot, which is great for large data sets, or this little plus sign, or a larger block that's going to be used for graphing. So I'm going to leave it on that mark. Okay, now I should be ready to draw the graph. And there we go. It's plotted the points for us. If you got an error at this stage, there's a few different possible ways you might have, a few different possible errors that you can run into. If you go to your y equals, if you had some sort of syntax error, maybe just scroll through here, see if there's any odd things written in your y equals equations. You can just, if you had whatever, something like that, that would cause an error because I haven't completed this tan function. Whatever is in your y equals, you can just clear them. Another possible error, maybe you're trying to plot things in plots 2 and 3, and maybe some of those lists that are being called for in plots 2 and 3 are empty. So if you had like plot 3 on, let's say, if it's highlighted right now, you would go up to it, hit enter to turn the highlighting off. You might have got a window range error where maybe you got a min and a max backwards, let's say. You can check that here. Or maybe you got a dimension error. If I go to stat and edit, maybe your lists are not the same length then. So make sure that your lists look like this and you don't have two different length lists. All right, so assuming that you now have your graph drawn, next thing we need to do is get the calculator to determine a parabola of best fit. So we want to get a parabola that's going to go either through all these points or as close to all these points as possible for a parabola to do. So to do a parabola of best fit, that's called quadratic regression. We will go back to the stat menu. We'll go to calculate, and option number 5 you can see is quadratic regression. There's other types of regression that we could do. We could do a line of best fit or a cubic of best fit. This would be a function of degree 3. A quartic best fit is a function of degree 4, a polynomial of degree 4, and so on. Okay, but we want a quadratic regression. So I'm going to choose that. I could run it at this stage. It'll give me the equation, but it won't draw the graph for me. So I would like to have this graph shown as well. So I have some arguments that I can put in after quadratic regression. The first argument is where are the x values? They are in list 1. So I'm going to go second and 1 to get list 1 on there. The next argument I have to enter after a comma. So right above the 7 is the comma button. Next argument I have to enter is where the y values are. They are in list 2, so I'm going to go second and L2. Then another comma, and now I need to tell the calculator at this spot to store the equation in either y1 or y2 or y3, so then that way it'll put it into my y equals screen. So when I graph it, I'll see the parabola that the quadratic regression calculates. So I need to type y1 here. I get to y1 through the variables menu, so hit variables, or vars. And then there's this y vars here, so I'm going to arrow over. I'm going to choose function. And here are different spots we can store the quadratic regression. So I'm just going to choose y1, hit enter now, and quadratic regression is run. You might have an r squared value in here as well, something called diagnostics, the graphing calculator will run with quadratic regression. And you can either have the diagnostics on or off. Right now mine are set to off, so it's not showing. If you go to your y equals, you can see it's taken the results of the quadratic regression and put it into our y1, because that's what we asked it to do. We hit graph now. There we go. And it has drawn the parabola for us. And I can see this time this is a parabola that fits the data points exactly. That doesn't always happen with regression. Could be that all these points would be scattered around the curve instead. But in this case, there was a parabola that could pass through all of the points. So that's it for quadratic regression. However, there is another part to this question, which we'll answer now. It says, once you've done it, the quadratic regression, then use the model to predict when the diaphragm will be 5 meters above the water. Okay, so I remember that my Y scale is going by tens, so the 5 meter mark is right around there. So I'm trying to find out what is the time value right around that spot there. Well, here's how I can do this. I'm going to go to my Y equals. I don't actually need the points drawn anymore, so I'm just going to turn off plot 1 now. Then in Y2, I'm going to type in a 5, and what that's going to do is it's going to draw a horizontal line, the horizontal line Y equals 5. And so now this is where the height is going to be 5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the intersection between the two curves that I've drawn here. Intersection, I can get that under the calculate menu. So I'm going to go second and trace. See, option number 5 is intersect. And the calculator goes through a couple different questions here. So the programmers were anticipating the fact that people want to be able to do intersections, and so they've made this program. They've also figured that, sometimes you might have 6 or 7 different graphs drawn, and it can only find the intersection of 2 curves at once. So we go through a series of questions to say, is this the first curve you want to use? So is Y1 one of the graphs you want to find the intersection of? It is for us. If it wasn't, I would cursor up or down to move to other equations. But Y1 is the one we want. And then it says, is Y2 the other curve you want? And it is. So I hit enter again. And then it says take a guess. So we could move left or right to get the cursor closer to the intersection point, or just press enter. And now it's found the intersection point. So it has guaranteed a height of 5. And it says the time value at which that happens is this 2.45 seconds.